Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network's BRN Sunday podcast. I'm Jeff Snyder, your host, and members of the media, academia, and financial services go around the globe to discuss and analyze the issues in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, and so much more. We've got a wonderful, great show. You know, you're all sitting at home. You've been waiting with bated breath for our show to come out, and we've got a very special guest. Going to be joined by Mark Avery. If you don't know Mark, he's a non-resident senior fellow in economic studies for Brookings. He's also a visiting scholar at the Wharton School, and he previously was the Treasury's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Retirement and Health and Policy in the Obama administration. So you're not going to want to miss this interview with Mark, so sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday Podcast. Welcome back, and now we're going to turn our attention to technology. And joining me on the line is Daniel Klein, Senior Technology and Consumer Products Reporter with The Motley Fool. Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm good given the trying circumstances.
Yeah, I think a lot of Americans out there, people listening to the program and those not listening to the program, are dealing with these are really interesting times. A lot of market turbulence, but a lot of concern over the virus, and people are working remotely. I'm calling you in your home, as we always do every week. And how's that going for you?
Yeah, so it's a little bit strange. I always work from home, yet somehow this is very difficult. And there's a couple of reasons for that. As you know, as the listeners know, because we talk about it, I travel quite a bit. Sometimes just because I choose to. I put in FaceTime at the office because it's more fun to connect with my coworkers, to do podcasts in person. And our office is closed through May 1st. So I've had two separate trips that I'd planned to do just to go visit coworkers, meetings and such, canceled. I've had a couple of pleasure trips canceled, and I had a convention in Las Vegas canceled. So this is the longest stretch I've been in Florida for the entire 3 years I've lived in Florida. So that's personally trying. On the second piece of it, we live downtown in a 1,200 square foot condo. Perfectly viable because we have everything at our doorstep. Walk to restaurants, walk to coffee, walk to the movies. Obviously, a lot of that is shut down, or the restaurants are takeout only. So now we have three of us at home. My 16-year-old's not in school. My wife is working from home, and we're dealing with only having one office. So it has been a bit trying.
Yeah, and I would say this. I mean, my wife's working. I'm actually looking at her now as we're doing the podcast. Because as you know, our studio is here in the apartment, so she is home. We've got our two cats. So far, we're not climbing the walls, but I think this is really difficult for people because you literally cannot go out to the mall. Malls are closed. The only thing you can do is take a walk, and you've got to practice social distancing there as well. Though with your family, because you're living with each other, you can be close to each other, but everyone else, you can't be near people. So I think it is a challenging
Yeah, I
situation.
mean, it's surreal. So my building has closed our gym,
Yeah.
which I would have preferred that they went to a sign-up system where maybe only two people could be there, so you could be 6 feet away. But thankfully, my personal trainer has privileges at a gigantic gym, and what they're doing is they're allowing one-on-one training, but only with a certain amount of people in the building. So we were in a room together yesterday the size of a football field, and it was just the two of us. Now, I don't live with my trainer, but we've been together for the past 9 months. So if he has it, I have it. We're sort of believing at this point. But there are ways to make working from home easier. It's something I've done, obviously, for the past 6 years. And admittedly, I can't go to Starbucks now. I can't do some of the things I normally do to break up my day. But there is some advice I can share to people doing this for the first time. And let's start with technology. That's the subject of the day. Probably makes sense. One of the smartest things you can do is figure out how to plug in to your Ethernet, your internet connection, instead of using Wi-Fi. In most cases, your internet is a shared resource. In my case, definitely, I live in a building, but usually in your neighborhood, if a lot of people are on the internet at the same time, it slows down. And one way to counteract that is to plug in directly to your router. Now, that's not always easy, as today's laptops don't generally or don't always have Ethernet ports. but Amazon has a ready supply of USB or Lightning or whatever it is ports you can buy, and they're usually about $19. You plug it in. Mine also has a place because I'm using a Mac laptop that literally has one port. So it also has a spot for my power cord. It has a spot for an additional monitor. So, a lot of people are having Zoom meetings. They're doing things that they don't normally do that are more taxing on internet. And my speeds, and I test this all the time because we do these shows, my speeds are 10 times faster when I'm plugged in. And I'm not even plugged in directly to my router. I'm plugged into an auxiliary Wi-Fi extender that I have that, again, was like $30, $40. Didn't do much to extend my Wi-Fi network, but works as a direct conduit to the internet. We have in my living room, I bought a bunch of different length cables. So if we have to plug literally directly to the router, we can do it from anywhere in the house. So that's one tip.
Yeah. Dan, before you move on to the next tip, what is your sense? I've been reading, Sarah Krause does some amazing reporting from she's with the Wall Street Journal. What about the potential strain? If everyone's working from home, you, me, the rest of many Americans are because if they're not having to do construction work or do something that's a little bit more physical in nature, or have to make deliveries, etc., or a police officer, etc. What's the potential there that the internet gets strained not only here in the U.S. but around the globe, right? I mean, that's a potential possibility.
Yeah, so I can only speak to the US, and it's a possibility, but companies are taking some active management steps to deal with this.
Hmm.
All of the wireless carriers, for example, have made sort of emergency efforts to increase capacity. There have been some calls on Netflix to, in certain areas, only offer standard definition to impact its effect on the internet. But with all the news stories, and I literally spend my entire day now, 10 to 12 hours a day, scanning the internet for breaking stories, I have not seen any significant reports of the internet going down. So the reality is most people have been home for the week. Kids have been home. They're playing video games online. They're watching things. So I think in most places we have the capacity. The one thing that's nice about this, while it feels like a hurricane shutdown and people
Hmm.
are hoarding supplies like a hurricane shutdown, there was no actual snowstorm or hurricane. So we don't have that added bit of towers being damaged or internet infrastructure being damaged. So the reality is everything is functioning. We still have the ability to repair things and add capacity because we're not dealing with a weather incident. A repair crew can be sent to the field and still practice safe social distancing. So I don't think that's a concern, but this might be the time to be a good citizen and not have 7 TVs you're not watching streaming. Though I doubt anyone's doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking across the coffee table and I've got some books laid out. Maybe I'll actually pick one up. Dan, I interrupted you. Give us a few more tips. We've got a couple minutes left.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge of working at home is that everything you own is there. I work at a desk that has my Xbox and my PlayStation and a giant television and all sorts of other stuff available to me. And at the moment, my wife is here and my son is bored, so there's plenty I could do that isn't working. And what I do to combat that, this has always been my strategy, is I get up in the morning at, a normal time between 7 and 7:30, and I do the things I least want to do first.
Hmm.
So if I have things on deadline, obviously I do that. But whatever my least pleasant tasks are, I do them early in the morning. And the goal of that is when I get to that period at noon where it's time to take a lunch break, where maybe I'm going to go to the gym, maybe things are slowing down, everything I have in front of me is usually something I wanted to do. So it's easier to do. And that sounds, like it's pretty simple advice, but that helps me accomplish more. I'm also using this time. Look, I can't do a lot of the things I normally do, so why not do more work? And my goal in doing more work, I'm a contractor, I get paid for what I do, is I'm banking money so I can take time off when this passes. And that's not how a salaried worker works. But if you're a salaried worker, there's always projects you can work on to get ahead of. So when this ends, you can have normal days or maybe be able to use some paid vacation or just take some time off. So really, I'm focusing on productivity.
Yeah, Dan. Do you think that this, we've got 30 or more days in this situation, could be longer depending on what the results are? Because, I mean, frankly, no one knows, right? I mean, no one knows what the results are going to be. You have some historical information, but there's, based on what the experts say, we don't know. So do you think that this changes, effectively shifts the paradigm of how we do work? Do you think that these new business practices that people do, whether they're using Zoom or Skype to do meetings or due diligence meetings in the case of investment management, people minimize their travel? Do you think that this is an actual time where things change for good over the
So,
long term?
yes and no. I think more companies are going to become less afraid of letting workers work from home. This idea that because you're home, you're going to work less is silly. Most people who work at home don't have a commute. They generally feel more responsible, so they're more available. They're not getting distracted by coworkers. So that's very important. You're also seeing adoption of tools. I've probably talked to 30 or 40 people who have never had a Zoom meeting that are doing Zoom meetings. Zoom is a very simple technology, but if you've never used it, then you don't have it. More companies are adopting Microsoft Teams and adding Slack and other things that they frankly should have been using anyway.
Hmm.
So on that level, I think you're going to see more companies being comfortable with letting workers have some flexibility and having an infrastructure in place where it doesn't really matter where you are. My company, Motley Fool, I give them all the credit in the world. We largely have allowed people to work where they want to. And some of my coworkers have dealt with really serious family situations. A former coworker works in Alexandria, Virginia. Her mom in England was sick. She was able to fly home to England, work her normal hours on a U.S. schedule, but be home for her mom because the company allows that flexibility. And I think you're going to see more and more of that.
Yeah, and Dan, lastly, let's a lot of kids home. I know your son's off from school this week. We were talking before we went live. Um, this could also modify the way that kids. I mean, they're already using their devices in general, right? But this could modify the way we teach both college students and high school students. I don't know if this modifies elementary school, right? Because you still need to puts a lot of onus on the parent to parent and be there, which can't always be the case. But this could also modify maybe some of the secondary education and also post-secondary education.
Yeah, I've been amazed that our school system has literally been educating teachers on technology it should have been educating teachers about at least a year ago, if not 2 or 3 years ago.
Mm.
It's shocking to me that an area that has, in our case, hurricane shutdowns, in other parts of the country, it would be snowstorm or other weather shutdowns, hasn't implicated really simple things. We use Google Classroom. Why isn't there a protocol for dropping lessons into Google Classroom? Why isn't there a push for teachers to have the very basic technology, a decent laptop and a camera? You need to do a Zoom classroom. We're making efforts now to make sure kids have internet connections and laptops, and those lists should have been maintained anyway. It was always a possibility that we miss school for a couple of weeks, whether that be for weather or whatever. And, literally, this is people who are not in touch with technology just being told like how the internet works. And that seems very bizarre to me.
Yeah, well, I think this is going to force a lot of change as we were talking about. Well, Dan, looking forward to having you. I appreciate you coming on the program. I know you're incredibly busy. Obviously, I know you're home, but you're busy and managing the family and helping your family adjust. Looking forward to having you on the network on Tuesday, where we're going to talk a little about retail and streaming. So we'll have a serious conversation and then maybe a not so serious conversation. Looking forward to that.
Looking forward to it.
All right, Dan. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks.
Welcome back, and we're going to talk markets, and I always am excited for this because I enjoy talking to our markets contributors. And joining me on the line is Kevin Kelly. He is the co-founder of Delphi Digital, a cryptocurrency and digital currency research firm. Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's good to talk with you, and I don't mean to start with the down. I'm trying to be positive, and I want people to to be positive and optimistic because this is kind of an unforeseen thing. But
Mhm.
let's just check in. I want to get the cryptocurrency second, but give us your quick take on what's happened in the markets this week.
Yeah, so if you remember, probably almost a month ago to the day, I put out a tweet thread that basically said that we're rapidly, if not, we're at or approaching an inflection point within markets, which just so happened to be the top of the stock market. So that was hindsight being 2020,
Mm.
not the worst call in the world. But one of the reasons why I did that and why I bring it up is because if you think about what's changed in the last 4 weeks alone, it's absolutely night and day. It's pretty incredible. And so I think right now what's interesting is that you have some people who kind of panic sold, markets obviously sold off. You had this big kind of liquidity crunch that we can get into if you haven't covered already, and the reasons behind that. But going forward, the tough part right now, I think, is everyone's trying to look forward and say, okay, how do we look through what the potential economic fallout and damage of, not only just the health system stresses that are put on our healthcare system by the coronavirus, what the actual economic impact and fallout is going to be because of all the measures that are taken around it to contain this virus. And the short answer is no one really knows. I mean, if you look across different economists, whether it's Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, a lot of relatively well-known economists, their numbers are kind of all over the place. And then if you look at analysts who are trying to forecast what some of these companies that they cover are going to be experiencing over the next couple quarters, again, all over the map, some of which haven't even updated their numbers yet because they simply just don't know how to kind of factor this into their models. So you've seen, a drastic rise in volatility across, just about every asset class at this point. Crypto certainly is not excluded from that. And so I think right now it's a good time to take a step back and try and reevaluate, where we are and what we think, the bull bear and kind of base case going forward is. But it's not a time to be out there trying to really trade these markets because even the professionals are kind of struggling to come up with, a very short or shorter term timeline on where, markets and asset prices go.
It's not just stocks and bonds. It's every asset class,
It's
and
everything.
it's not just one economy. So it's not just the U.S. economy. It's every economy is impacted by this. So, it's not like there's a panacea out there or perfect
Mm-hmm.
solution to this, or one fund manager or stock picker just has the right. I don't think anyone has the right, and that's why the stay the course for the average, for the
Yep.
real American, is probably the best course of action right now.
Yeah, and again, it's a challenging time because the way in which I look at this, and it might even be too simplistic, but it's not to say that the global economy wasn't. I mean, we've talked about it a lot on the show. The global economy was certainly in a vulnerable place going into this entire kind of coronavirus outbreak. But that's not to say that, anyone was expecting the economy to actually contract, right? And actually, growth to slow down so considerably and contract within the first couple of quarters of 2020, right? So this isn't this is a real true kind of black swan type of event that no one by definition could have foreseen coming. But the way in which I look at it is you're seeing a lot of monetary and fiscal stimulus get thrown at this issue right now. Some of which is I fully support, some of which I think could do a bit better job of being a bit more targeted. But nonetheless, the whole goal right now is basically for, policymakers and lawmakers to build this bridge to get us across the next, let's call it, 2, maybe even 3 quarters, where you're really, really going to see the biggest impact of what's going on with, not only, government lockdowns, self-quarantines, things of that nature, kind of the fall in aggregate demand. Policymakers are basically trying to build us a bridge to get over there. And what we're looking at now is, okay, if we can actually weather this storm, right, and you have a lot of, fiscal stimulus that started to come out in terms of targeting not only, your individual person who might be affected by this, but also targeting, small businesses who, literally depend on, people being out and about, people being able to move around, go to stores, in-store foot traffic, things of that nature. If we can get across that bridge, it's going to be a different world on the other side of it. And it's going to be one in which I certainly think you'll look back, and at this point, the stock market being down almost 30% from its all-time high, literally about a month ago to the day.
Yeah.
It'll certainly wind up being, I think, a favorable entry point, but that's not advice to say go out and start trading this market right now. It's one of those things where if you do have cash, that's you have your emergency funds for a situation like this, absolutely don't tap into that. But if you have this like kind of excess cash on the side that you've been meaning to put in the market and just simply haven't, now is a good time to start at least evaluating or starting to, I think, allocate that in small increments, because again, the market has certainly sold off pretty considerably. Can we dip lower from here? Of course, but I think longer term, 12 months from now, really 5 years from now, the market, I think will recover and push, beyond all-time highs.
Yeah, well, I think that's everyone's hope, right? I mean, I think
Right.
the hope is that this thing, I don't know if that the expectations of everyone are too high, because I think the expectation is, we're all at home, sitting here, you're home, I'm home, our families are home, everyone's home, and that this thing's just going to be done in that, the magic number is that 15-day window, right? But that's just when we get more information. It's so we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know what the impact is going to be. There's going to be a new set of decisions made based on those 15 that information after 15 days.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of view this as like a moment to moment circumstance. I mean, this is
Yeah.
really unprecedented.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really is, just because, again, people have made or tried to make, at least in the initial days, you were looking at things like SARS, which we know at this point is this is drastically has a drastically larger influence. But even looking back something at like the Spanish flu in the 1918, 1919 range, the world is just so drastically different today in terms of globalization, how interconnected it is, and supply chains and all that. I mean, it's not even close to an apples to apples comparison. So when you say unprecedented, I mean, it really, I'm with you. I truly believe it is an unprecedented event that people are trying to make sense of and put some ideas around. But it's almost funny at this point. You're seeing people who are kind of almost scrap 2020 in general. They're not even putting out price forecasts, GDP forecasts. They're now moving into 2021, 2022, again, trying to basically forecast what happens once we get past this and what that rebound is going to look like.
So Kevin, take your equity strategist hat off. Let's go into cryptocurrency. What can you tell us what's happening here? Because cryptocurrency at one point when we had market volatility was kind of in a way, a safe haven. It was it was non-correlated in terms of being an asset class. What's happening now with Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, all these other cryptos out there?
Yeah, I mean, long term, again, certainly think that Bitcoin can find its place as a, hedge against events like this, or a safe haven asset. But it's just simply not, that's just not the case. It's not in that form today. It still sits further out the risk curve. And again, when you have these type of liquidity driven events, right? And if you look at gold, I mean, gold's a great parallel. Gold's actually sold off since all this market volatility picked up as well, right? The only thing for a while there was treasuries that was working, and those ripped higher. But even those have sold off a bit now because you have a lot of fiscal stimulus coming out. Government's going to be obviously issuing a lot more debt, putting pressure on yields, things of that nature. So when you talked about earlier, there was really no place to hide. You can't even hide really in treasuries right now because the risk is pretty high. So, we wouldn't expect Bitcoin and crypto, again, a very nascent technology, unproven emerging asset class, to be kind of this safety trade or flight to safety move in an environment like this. And again, historically, if you look back and look at times in which, even over the last 10 years, this cycle where the S&P's had some pretty sizable or volatile moves and sizable sell-offs, Bitcoin is historically, once volatility hits a certain point, Bitcoin historically has kind of followed or coincided with the stock sell-off, because again, it still sits in this kind of risk bucket for a lot of people.
Kevin, what about using blockchain? So forgetting the digital currency, the cryptocurrency, now let's talk about the underlying technology known as blockchain. Is this technology able to be deployed to, for example, track coronavirus cases or be used to fight the coronavirus virus?
It's a tough question. I mean, you wouldn't, I don't think, at least, or I haven't seen anybody come up with a strategy or an idea to use it in a permissionless way, or to use a permissionless blockchain to be able to do that. You certainly could have some of these, and you're already seeing it actually before all this happened. A lot of these different medical providers and companies that make medical devices and so on and so forth, experimenting or at least looking into having some type of enterprise enterprise or private blockchain, to be able to kind of use the immutability aspect of it, and be able to track and timestamp a lot of data in and out, and what's going on with some of their supply chains. So that could, a private or enterprise type solution certainly could probably help. I think right now, though, to be honest, the world's in such a kind of chaotic state right now that the most important kind of top priorities of again, just getting people to either self-quarantine, being able to pump up the production of different medical equipment that a lot of our first responders need. I think that's just top priority for everybody. And maybe for the next global pandemic, we'll have something in place by that time where blockchain will be utilized. But I think right now it's just, again, too early, and there's just a lot more focus on the kind of here and now, and trying to curb this as much as people can.
Yeah, well, I guess it's more of a wait and see. Every day, every hour brings a new development. But Kevin, I want to thank you so much for taking some time away from your day and your family for joining us. And stay safe, and we'll talk to you very soon.
Absolutely, stay safe, and everybody out there, stay safe. Thanks, Jeff.
Kevin. Bye. Welcome back. And now we've got a very special guest. I'm joined by Mark Avery. He's a non-resident senior fellow for Brookings, and he's also a visiting scholar at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Mark, thanks so much for making time for us this morning.
Jeff, pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to talk with you. And you have, just for the audience's benefit, you've had a long career making policy, working on policy. So we're really glad to tap into your experience and expertise. So what's top of mind for you, the folks at Brookings and the folks at Wharton? What are you thinking about these days?
Well, of course, everything is coronavirus all the time. Yep. At the moment. But I thought that, including its policy implications and the related legislative and regulatory activity in response to the crisis that I've been involved with to some degree, been in touch with folks in Congress and at Treasury and Iras who are working on the legislative and regulatory responses to the COVID-19 challenge. But I thought, Jeff, perhaps we could have a few corona-free minutes here and look back at what seems like a more innocent time now, back when Congress passed the Secure Act. Do you remember that?
I do. I think our audience is looking for a little. The reason why they tune in is they're looking for a little entertainment and a little bit of a break from COVID-19. So anything we can do to distract people. And I think, look, at the end of this virus outbreak, pandemic, whatever you want to call it, we're going to have the Secure Act, and I think it's top of mind for many people. So what can you tell us there, Mark? Because I know you have had, you were part of the Affordable Care Act. You've done so many other great legislative things. So what's your perspective on Secure?
Well, so Secure, of course, is, as we all know, not anything like the last word. And it's I think encouraging that after 13 years since the 2006 Pension Protection Act, we've now got some legislation of a relatively broad-based nature that is starting to happen in our area relating to retirement and savings. And so Secure is really the 1.0 phase in that, and Congress is now well along in developing Secure 2.0, if you will, a larger package, and I think a more actually important and significant package of retirement provisions. But stepping back for a minute to look at where we are in the wake of Secure, number one, I'm a fan of it. I'm happy to have had a hand in developing or negotiating some of the open MEP, multiple employer plan provisions, the safe harbor for selecting an annuity in a 401k or other DC plan, the disclosure of retirement income estimates that are the equivalent of the account balance that someone has in their 401k, the new small business credit for auto enrollment. If a small business has a plan that uses auto enrollment by amending the plan, or if they adopt a new plan and it has auto in it, they get that additional credit, and the expansion of the small business credit that we've had for many years now for adopting a new qualified plan or other retirement vehicle, which I helped develop back in the 90s. So, I think there are a bunch of provisions here that are potentially helpful and that will do some good. And probably the biggest one is the ability to have multiple employer plans using unrelated employers.
Yep.
That, along with the trio of lifetime income related provisions. And, I do think that over the next year and several years, we'll see some movement of the needle, Jeff, in terms of plan formation that will be, attributable to the open MEPs. But I do think that it's actually somewhat different from what Congress thought it was signing up for, in the sense that there was a tremendous amount of hype and hyperbole around the Secure Act generally and the open MEP provisions in particular, as we know, around the theme of making it possible for small businesses to band together. Invariably, the language that was used to describe this and the kind of mantra on Capitol Hill, let small businesses band together to form a 401k plan. And I think that that is a little bit of a oversimplification of what we're actually likely to see, as lots of people realized, even as they were lobbying that. And what I mean, Jeff, is that, as we all kind of know, a longstanding cliche in our field, that plans are sold, not bought. That basically you have to persuade employers that don't have a plan that they want to adopt a 401k or some other retirement program for their employees. They're usually not chasing after the vendors with the idea of adopting one, right? And so that's been our challenge for decades now, to break through the coverage barrier and get the 1/3 of our workforce who don't have access to a plan at work to get that kind of access, to have their employers, where they have an employer, adopt a plan and make it easy for people to save. And of course, the folks who don't have an employer, if they're working, then make it easier for them to save as self-employed or independent contractor types. And I think Secure will help with that, but that it won't be by small businesses banding together. It'll be by the record keeper firms, and in particular the asset manager firms, going out and aggressively putting larger multiple employer programs together with much more focus on actually combining existing plans than Congress originally understood or anticipated.
I agree with you completely. And Mark, just taking a step back, I mean, you have a lot of experience in this area in developing policy, but it almost seems to me like we have to have this national conversation about saving for retirement. And I don't think we've had it in some ways. There's always things that get in the way. I mean, we've had this national dialogue on healthcare, and we continue to have a national dialogue on healthcare. Right. But it almost seems like and because the comment you made about plans are often sold, not bought, and I agree with that, because small businesses have a lot of priorities that they have to attend to, especially given today's economic climate to deal with. But it almost seems to me that, if we had this national dialogue about what the retirement system should look like, and that the importance of saving and what that means at a national level, like we did with healthcare and some of these other things, we actually might get more people actually trying to not demand, but ask more of their employers, or ask more of the record keepers and hey, what do you have to offer, and what can you provide to us? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I think that spirit has been very much alive within our community, right, for years now, and as you know, we've engaged in efforts that are renewed and refreshed frequently to stir up that national dialogue and get people focused on the importance of saving and the value of the private pension system, the employer-sponsored system in helping people save in a very powerful and effective way, not to mention a tax-favored way. But I think that the struggle that a small business owner typically has to just stay afloat and get the business to succeed, and to wear all the hats that he or she has to wear in order to get a small business up to a point where they can be, confident and stable, and start to delegate more and more of the functions. That's a really steep hill to climb, as so many people know, and that's where we're having traditionally the most trouble. The small business owner who says, yeah, I'd love to have a 401k for my people in another couple of years when, we've really achieved some more stability, when I'm more confident that I'll be around with this business 5 or 10 years from now. And, maybe when I feel like I'm in shape to offer a matching contribution, perhaps, or something like that. But in the meanwhile, I'm going, full throttle, just trying to make ends meet. And of course, never has that been more true than now, without lapsing back into talking about our current crisis. Obviously, small business folks are now hugely affected, and it's hard to get 401k on the small business owner's radar screen.
Yeah, well, certainly now is not the time to do that, given everything that's going on. And I think it is everyone's in survival mode. Mark, we've had a lot of success at the state level, with some of these plans, the California plan, and Illinois, I think, and Oregon, and some of the others. Right. Do you expect that to continue as well? Because you've seen the states step up in a lot of cases, and that's, in my mind, that's positive too.
Yeah, Jeff, I think that is actually arguably the most significant long-term development in the retirement landscape at the moment. that the states, the three you mentioned, Oregon, Illinois, California, which are now implementing automatic enrollment of private citizens in IRAs, automatic enrollment in the 401k sense that the person is enrolled unless they want to opt out, and they can opt out anytime. So it works just much like a 401k, except that the employer is not required to, does not have a 401k. It's for employers that don't have plans, and those employers are required, other than the newest ones and the smallest ones, those employers are required to simply be a conduit and let their employees be auto-enrolled in a private sector managed IRA with a 401k-like, QDIA-like investment menu, target date fund as a default investment, 5% of pay as a default contribution level, escalating 1% a year each year that the employee stays with the employer. And these things are not only in those three states, but have now been adopted, signed into law by New Jersey, Connecticut, and Maryland as well, with a slew of other states that are following suit or in the process of considering or working on bills that are essentially the same as this model that the 6 states have adopted, that is automatic enrollment in IRAs. And Jeff, I think this is the way to break through on coverage. With the national conversation that you're talking about, the continuing campaign to raise consciousness among small employers, among individuals, of consciousness of the importance of saving and the need to do more of it. I think this kind of action, especially if we can get a nationwide version of it, is the path. It's the most realistic way to get another 30 million, 40 million working people into the system. And so I'm glad you've brought that up, because I think that is huge. It's just in its infancy now, and my hope has always been, and frankly, I started this, largely started this movement back 18 years ago by going to a number of states and talking to them about whether they could do something to help expand coverage without running afoul of ERISA and its preemption of state law. And, ultimately this is what has resulted, with the thought that, the ideal way of doing this is not state by state, even though these states are really very congruent in what they're doing. They're not imposing conflicting requirements on employers that might have people in more than one state and yet still don't have a plan. These states are essentially using the same template with only minor differences from one state to the next. But the real way to do this, the best way to do this, of course, is just have a single uniform nationwide program, which I think is going to grow out of the state activities, that Congress is going to look increasingly favorably at what the states are doing and the results that they're producing. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands already of new savers in our country from this free choice that individuals have. They can opt out, or they can go along, or they can adjust their contributions or their investments as they wish, but a free choice that still sort of propels them, nudges them in the direction of saving. And so I think that is a huge effort. And to tie into our earlier conversation, that is probably the largest single proposal that Congress has in front of it for Secure 2.0. That is, in the next year or two, as those packages get put together, once we get back to normalcy after the current crisis, as our next set of retirement legislation gets assembled, I think the single most important piece there, what I hope will be the keystone of Secure 2.0, will be automatic enrollment in IRAs on a nationwide basis, building on what the states have done, incorporating the current state programs, which would be easy to do because they're most of them are so similar. So I think that's what we really should push for and have to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have my fingers crossed. Let's first get through this virus and all these challenges that we have, and then dive right into the next round of legislation. Well, Mark, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the program this morning. Really appreciate your insight. I think the audience does as well. And look forward to having you back both here and on the television network at some point in the future once we all can leave our homes.
Sounds good, Jeff. Stay safe and stay healthy, you and everyone listening.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Welcome back. Now we're going to shift gears, talk a little real estate. On the line is Market Watch's real estate reporter, Mr. Jacob Passy. Hi, Jacob. How are things going at home?
Going well, settling into the work from home life. My husband also works from home just in general, so feel like I've completely disrupted his entire workflow, but getting used to it slowly but surely. How about you?
We're doing okay. My wife's home. The cats are home. Very similar kind of demeanor, but we're doing the best we can. I think a lot of people are in that situation, trying to figure out how to get their work done, but also make sure that they can be, not get on each other's nerves. So we're working hard to try to do that. So as I was doing the show, my wife just went into the back room, and I guess she doesn't want to hear me do the show. So maybe she'll come on at some point.
Yeah,
she can co-host with me.
I'm in the bedroom because my husband he's a wedding photographer and is on a conference call with a bunch of other wedding vendors discussing the upheavals in the wedding, and this left him to that and went to a quiet place myself.
So let's jump right in. Let's try to approach life and keep some level of normalcy, even though it's hard with this virus. But what can you tell us? What's going on in the real estate market, Jacob?
Yeah. So today existing home sales figures for February came out, which was a lot of the real estate data comes out a month after. So didn't just coronavirus yet. In fact, it was actually a very strong month. Sales jumped over 6% between January and February. This was existing home sales, so previously owned homes. And they increased for all regions except for the Northeast. Northeast still increased year over year, just kind of fell a little bit from January. But, really strong sales. It was the strongest February sales data since 2007. Mm-hmm. So, this kind of shows what a strong place the housing market was kind of in right before all this happened. So what does that mean now that coronavirus is happening? And Zillow put out this past week, this interesting report where they kind of looked at, previous research studies done on what happened to the economy of different parts of the world after pandemics happened, and also looking at, what happened in housing markets. And what they basically found is, based on previous research, good news for homeowners is, prices usually remain pretty stable throughout throughout a downturn caused by a pandemic, because as we're seeing in the economy in the U.S. right now, is certainly causing a downturn. But sales activity slows tremendous, and that's not too super surprising. And you can kind of already see why that would happen right now. With this pandemic, this week a lot of major real estate brokerages like Redfin, Remax announced that they are going to move away from doing open houses because of the orders from the CDC to not have more than 10 people in a space. They're moving away from open houses, which makes sense. I mean, what if I was a person trying to sell a home? I wouldn't want a lot of people traipsing through my home right now who could, bring, COVID-19 with them unknowingly and infect others. You don't want that liability. So open houses are being canceled left and right. Realtors are moving to more of a virtual tour type setting. They're the nice thing about the technology that's come out in recent years is you can do a lot of really fantastic 3D tours of homes. Redfin mentioned that they are still doing one-on-one tours with people, but even then there are restrictions. They have to stay 6 feet away from each other, keeping with social distancing. During the tours, they are not going to small rooms in a home, so they're not going into small bathrooms, into small attics, things like that. So, it's a less of a tour that you might get otherwise under normal circumstances. Redfin agents are also doing virtual tours via, FaceTime, where, an agent will go to a home and then will FaceTime you, and you can, send them prompts like, oh, can you go back to the bathroom? I want to see it a bit better. Or go, turn to the left, things like that. So, interesting things going on, but, at the end of the day, a lot of, I think you and I have talked about this when it comes to mortgages, but it's also true of real estate, home purchases. A lot of this is going to slow down just because people can't see homes. The biggest thing you make in their lives. So it's unlikely that someone's going to want to purchase something sight unseen in person. Yeah. And then also, in New York, we now have a shelter-in-place order. California has one. As those orders that require non-essential business to stop or not be done in the office, as those orders come through, more and more people are going to be unable to just go to, their lawyer's office or wherever to, sign on the dotted line and close a sale. So sales activity is definitely going to grind to a screeching halt to a large extent. We might still see some sales going on that can be done online. But and it's unclear, how long, after things resolve, the downturn will be. The Zillow study pointed out that in Hong Kong, during the SARS epidemic, back in the early 2000s, sales rebounded pretty quickly once things cleared up, because there was that pent-up demand. But, I think with this, the thing to keep in mind is with previous, pandemics, epidemics, we haven't seen, the same extent of, just overall economic shutdown going on, and I'm sure you've been talking about this, but with so many people losing their jobs, with so many people losing their money in the markets, which may have been their down payment, those things are going to have a longer term effect. And so, it'll be kind of a wait and see type thing. But, definitely February was probably the last big hurrah before we start to see some of the effects of coronavirus in the real estate market.
Yeah. So what do you think if someone were in the middle of a transaction, Jacob, and they had an approval from the bank, given the to buy a piece of property, right? So they're right in the middle of this thing. Does that just get thrown out because we're in a totally different paradigm now? Is that what you think happens?
I would, it doesn't necessarily just get thrown out. In many states have passed laws allowing for remote online notarization, so that, you basically kind of like an e-signature setting. Mm-hmm. And so that is allowed in some states, about half of states, I believe, at this point, but not all. And so, you need to check. If you're buying a home, you probably have hired a lawyer to oversee the sales contract. And so you might want to confer with your lawyer or confer with your real estate agent and, get a sense of whether you can close in a remote way on the home. Other thing to keep in mind, though, is if you close, it's going to be hard to move right now. As more and more non-essential work is being told to stop as the virus has spread, depending on when you were, you'll want to, probably talk a bit more to the seller and, see how you can negotiate those things if you were hoping to move in soon. That might not be possible right now. And because that, wouldn't necessarily be considered essential. But, definitely see if you can, there is a chance you might be able to still do stuff especially if you've already, selected the property, got a contract drawn up, and, gotten your pre-approval from your mortgage lender. Mm-hmm. If you're in a state that allows for remote online notarization, you might be in the clear to go ahead with the sale. And to be sure, that there probably will be sales like that will continue happening for these next few months. It's just not going to be anywhere near the type of volume we would normally see this time of year, especially because the spring home buying season is coming into effect now. And so this is, usually the most popular time of year to buy. So the timing of things is not great for the housing market.
Yeah, well, I guess more to come, and I think like you just alluded to, I mean, we have to just reset our expectations, all of us, that housing sales will slip in March. I think that's the mentality that everyone has to have, given the circumstances, and then we'll just have to see what the federal government, the states are doing and the economy is doing to see how things kind of reshape themselves over the coming months. Jacob Passy, always a pleasure talking with you. Glad you are getting along well with your partner working from home, your husband working from home, and we look forward to chatting with you again next week, my friend. Take care of yourself.
Take care of yourself, too.
Thanks, bud. Bye-bye. Bye. Welcome back. Now it's time to take a look at all the regulation, litigation, and legislation, and there's a lot going on Capitol Hill. And who better to do that? They're joining us from their respective bunkers. David Levine, Kevin Walsh, both are partners and principals with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, how are you today?
We're doing well, Jeff. I mean, I think everybody's trying to get by, and the week we've had has been just quite the week, with more weeks looking like this ahead. Yeah. But all things considered, I think both David and I are doing well.
Well, good. Glad to hear it. David, thanks so much for you and Kevin joining us. What's top of mind this week as you are working with clients from your respective homes?
Sure. And Jeff, I'm going to put a little plug in if you don't mind.
Of course.
As everybody right now, more and more of us are working at home and more of us are told not to go out. Where it's permissible, don't forget your small and local businesses that are doing things like carry out and restaurant. There are a lot of people who are really on the edge right now. So if you have a chance, try to help them. And that goes to what we do with our clients and trying to help their employees to pivot a little. Yep. And one of the things we're seeing, there's so much focus. Kevin talked last week about the various sick leave and coronavirus leave and those items. And Kevin's going to talk about what's coming up on more legislation in a moment. But I think it's also good to say, okay, I'm running a plan. What does this mean to me right now? And let's start with the basics. If you're running a 401k plan, we'll leave defined benefit out of here on the retirement side. First of all, from a corporate standpoint, are you making employer contributions? Do you need to conserve cash? If you have a safe harbor plan, in many cases, safe harbor plans can, depending on what your notices are in communications, you can change your match mid-year. Nobody wants to hurt your employees, but we know it's about your business surviving. So that might be number one. Number two, if you don't have a safe harbor, doesn't mean you should change your match, but if you need to, think about the process. How do you do amendments and notifications? That's a big discussion item right now. Not that people want to do it, but in some cases, it's a necessity, number one. Number two, beyond sort of the corporate items about that, you then get into making sure your plans keep running. As more and more of us work from home, we have a lot of companies are very remote-based and everything already, but think about your governance and your plans. How are your plans operating? Do you have the ability for people to sign documents electronically, approve things electronically? Ask your vendors what they're doing, and a lot of them are really well set, but it's good to do that because remember, if you're working from home, you should still be monitoring and helping things move along, which takes us to number three, what's facing your employees, and that may actually be really number one here. When you're facing your employees, there's questions. Number one, can I take hardship distributions? This Iras changed its hardship distribution rules, and there's a debate whether what's going on has been declared a disaster or not. But there's different ways that you might be able to allow hardships, and it's worth looking at it, talking to your vendor. I know as lawyers, we've talked to clients who are taking different approaches. Number two, what do you allow for in-service distributions? 3, loans for your, and yes, everybody says, well, rank and file employees, but also some employers have large excess or non-qualified plans that cover people who you think are wealthy, but also in these times they need their cash. So there's a lot of discussion about unforeseeable emergency distributions, feasibility, what is an unforeseeable emergency in a non-qualified plan. And then on top of this, it's also to think about your investments both internally and externally. How do you communicate them? Right now, if you have company stock, there's the discussion, how do you monitor, how do you manage it? There's lots of things. Think about it. I know we've been dealing with everything from independent fiduciaries to normal review, and think about your process, because in the end, process still applies here. We're not trying to make a joke out of anything, but calm approach makes sense, because look how the market moves every single day. And it's important to think, if you're making changes to your plan, is now the right time or not? How do you message it to people? Because if you're going to be doing a fund swap and stocks are volatile, do you want to do it now or not? There's no wrong or right answer to that, but think about process. I know that seems like, come on, David, we've got bigger things to fry. That's true, but there's a lot of things here that can make your life a lot easier if you want to do it. So that's some basics and we're getting very weedy on this with clients, but these are some basics really to think about. Kevin, can you tell us what's coming up in the next waves of legislation?
So, I think if you're an employer and you're struggling to keep the lights on, or if you're an employee who has been at work for a while and has a 401k balance, and you are going through quarantine or have been laid off as a result of the coronavirus, Congress has signaled that they're going to try to provide help. And we've done 2 coronavirus bills so far, and Congress is now working on a third. And this third bill is trying to start addressing some of the economic issues that are popping up as kind of the government goes through essentially a controlled shutdown of the U.S. economy. There's 2 things that it does to provide help kind of right now for people who have kind of retirement balances. The first is that, if the third coronavirus bill that's pending gets enacted, it will permit for penalty-free distributions of up to $100,000 through the end of 2020 for individuals who are impacted by COVID-19. Much like with other disaster relief provisions, these distributions will be able to be repaid should we all bounce back effectively. And then in terms of being taxed on those distributions, individuals have the option of being taxed on them all in 2020 or having the taxes spread out over a 3-year period. The other big thing that it's doing to help people use their retirement savings to get them through this period is they're permitting the size of a plan loan to increase from $50,000 to $100,000. And where loans are typically limited to half of the balance of a 401k account, they're allowing loans of up to 100% if your plan allows this. And this is significant because it again provides another source of liquidity for individuals while you may be stuck at home, while kind of your pay might be shortened. For businesses themselves and for individuals who don't have 401k balances to tap into, Congress is working on other fixes, but those are the 2 key things that they're doing that they're talking about doing through the retirement system. And I just want to highlight at the end, it's a very fluid situation. And this is in the proposal as of Friday morning. By the time you listen to this on Sunday morning, I would expect them to be a whole lot further along. So things could change.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Kevin and David. Obviously, I want to echo David's sentiments about helping small businesses. You can certainly go to Grubhub and Seamless and Uber Eats to support local restaurants and gift certificates, and just try to help each other out. And it sounds like, gentlemen, that there is a lot that can be done. Of course, people need to kind of wade through with respect to retirement plans and helping employees. And of course, there's a lot to wade through, but we really appreciate you gentlemen just kind of walking us through things that fiduciaries should or could consider, and also what could be coming down the pike. And it looks like Congress will and is acting. So all good news. Gentlemen, stay safe, and we will talk to you all again next week, hopefully with some better news.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye, Jeff. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that wraps up another great episode of the BRN Sunday podcast. I want to thank Mark Avery for stopping by the program, and I want to thank our great contributors for making time out of their busy schedules and business lives to analyze all the news in all these various areas. And I want to thank you, the listener. Thank you so much for tuning in with us. We appreciate it wherever you are. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next week right here on the BRN Sunday podcast.